Hi, this is Glenn Davis from Lenexa, Kansas, and today I'm going to play you the best guitar riffs from the 1960s and 1970s. But in addition to that, as a matter of fact, I'm going to give you the complete and accurate history of the guitar riff. And I'll start out by telling you, most historians agree that the guitar was invented a long time ago. That said, no guitar players actually played a riff until the early 60s. Till that time they were just strumming their guitars. But then in 1961, Benny King's band, the bass player in there, came up with this riff. When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see, and everybody thought, wow, that's really cool. How'd he do that? What's he doing? He keeps repeating the same notes. Yeah, what do we call that? And nobody knew what to call it, so they went to Benny King's bass player, whose name was Jonathan Riff, and they say, what do we call this? And he said, let's call it a riff, and everybody agreed with that, and that's why it's called a riff today. And then for the next 2 years, nobody had one, but everybody was trying to come up with something similar to what Jonathan Riff did. And Roy Orbison was working on one, and he'd go, but he couldn't get the rest of it. He'd stop there. And one day he added this. He goes, pretty woman walking down the street, pretty woman, kind I like to meet, pretty woman. So there Roy had the second riff ever invented, and I understand later in his life he said he wished he'd written that 3 years earlier and it would have been called an Orbison instead of a riff. Be it as it may, that was 64. In 65 things really started to open up and everybody was writing good riffs. Hermits took an old song called Two Silhouettes, sometimes called Silhouettes on the Shade, and they added this guitar riff to it. Made the song a really big hit again, and then the Outsiders came along, and this is historic for something else to happen with this song. They were playing Time Won't Let Me. And that was the guitar riff, you know. I can't wait forever, time won't let me, time won't let me, time won't let me. And they started playing this guitar solo. It went, oops. And they found out the guitar manufacturers paid attention to that, and that's the reason they started making cutaway guitars so people could get up and play those notes. So that song, Time Won't Let Me, is the reason guitar makers put cutaways in guitars. Little known fact. Rolling Stones saw the trend was going towards these riffs, so they came out with this. This will be the last time, maybe the last time, I don't know. And what they were singing about, they thought that would be the last time a guitar riff was ever used in music, because they thought they had pretty much run their course by that time. The famous thing about that riff is it makes the Rolling Stones go down in history as the first English guitar band to ever put a guitar riff in a song. Well, if you don't count Hermits, I guess. Then in 1968, John Fogerty from CCR soared to stardom because he played this riff. said he made that up just when he was sitting around the house, and all the music authorities believed him because they didn't remember that James Burton was playing it 10 years earlier. So that ends all the famous riffs from 1960. And before we go into 1970, if you're wondering why you haven't heard one of your favorite riffs from the 60s, I'll tell you the process of coming up with these is highly subjective. So with that being said, if you still wonder why you haven't heard your riff, then I guess you just don't know what the word objective means. So here we go in the 70s, this little known guitar player named Rick Derringer came up with a song called Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo, who probably nobody ever would have heard of, except that he put this really neat intro and with it went like this. So undoubtedly Eric Clapton heard that. It was the 1970s. So in 71, Eric came up with this, his own riff. That was Eric's contribution, a song called Layla. And this next one, Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple. Would probably go down in history as the most famous guitar riff at all time, except if you watch 2.5 Men, everybody got tired of seeing Jake play it on there, so people got to not like that one too much. One more thing about Deep Purple. I have another instructional video out there on my YouTube channel on how to play the solo. The Kentucky Woman, if you ever wanted to learn how to play that, you might check that out. After Smoke on the Water, we came out with a really good group here called Yes, and that was their name, and they made an album called Fragile, which was no more fragile than any other album, but that was the name of it. And they had this song called Long Distance Roundabout or Runaround or something. The problem is Steve Howe was so good on guitar and the band was so good that, you know, none of the garage bands could play their music, so that the Fragile album was the last one they ever made, and then they faded into obscurity. And but Pink Floyd was paying attention to things, and they came out with this. The reason that riff got so famous, I think people liked the name Money. So, and that's what Pink Floyd was thinking when they named the song. How can we get people to listen to our riff? When he said, well, let's use the word money. Everybody likes that. And through association, I guess that's how it became famous. And of course, David Gilmour, if I'm going to mention Ritchie Blackmore's solo in Kentucky Woman, he did one too in Comfortably Numb. And everybody likes his guitar work too. And here's one you don't find on many people's list, but I like this riff, so I included it. When I look back to all that at all. I like Paul Simon's riff in Code of Chrome, so I included it. Now, by 1975, I used to go into guitar stores, and whenever I picked up a guitar, I would play something like... Of course, that song became forbidden and you couldn't play it anymore. So whenever I go in a guitar store, I'd pick up a guitar and start playing a ZZ Top riff. Was let me try that again. One thing that should be perfectly clear from that riff is I don't have any editing software, so I only usually do about one take of these things, so let's move on. After that one came this riff. That was a Joe Wash from the Eagles riff, Life in the Fast Lane, and yeah, it was Joe Wash playing it, not Don Felder even. Don Felder is one of my favorite guitar players. And after Life in the Fast Lane comes a riff from my only disco song that I play any riffs from ever, and that's Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. Can tell by the way I use my walk, I'm a woman's man, no time to talk. Anyway, that was the riff that they played, and I always liked that one. Finally, I'm going to give you one more from the 70s, and that's... And My Sharona, I only included that because I hear it a lot with people making parody songs about the coronavirus. They play My Corona and use that tune. And that kind of ended the history of guitar riffs. They played them from the 60s and 70s and never came up with a good one. One person tried, though, was Kurt Cobain back sometime in the 90s. He wanted to revive guitar riffs, so he came out with this. And that was his attempt to revive guitar riffs, and I like that one. He did a tremendous job on that solo. And, but they never took off again. That was the only one, and that completely disappointed Kurt Cobain, and he was depressed for a long time afterwards, and, well, guitar riffs just never took off. So that's the complete history. You can quote me on any of these facts if you want to. And check out my other videos on my YouTube channel, Pickin' Blues Glenn Davis. And I did a lot of instructional video, and I hope you enjoyed this and had a good day. Thank you.